Great. So Crystal, feel free to, there we go. Great. So, Daphne, welcome. And to anyone who's watching on this recording later on, welcome as well to this seminar. And so we are My Money Workshop, and this presentation is called Taking the Stress Out of Managing Your Money. Next slide, please. Just a couple of housekeeping. So this is being recorded. We will, assuming Kota will be sharing the recording afterwards, but definitely feel free to unmute yourself at any time. And if you have technical issues, let us know. We'll try to help you at any point. Next slide. So the mission of My Money Workshop is to educate people to manage their finances and wisely and to make a lifetime of informed decisions. We support teens and adults across the tri-state area, New York tri-state area. And but really with the onset of digital, we can support people in other areas as well. But just know that our instructors and speakers are volunteers. Please note that we provide the following information for educational purposes only during the live webinars, and it's not intended to be any should not be considered advice as to your personal finances, but we will try to answer your questions as best as possible. Next slide. So how we work is that we partner as well, like Kota, with organizations and schools across the tri-state, as I mentioned, as well as prisons or organizations that support people who have been previously incarcerated and other entities to reach our participants and meet a real need, which is making sure that people have the tools to benefit them in their economic lives. We create a holistic program where the client is at the center and the participants is at the center, and with our client and our volunteers, we are working to support you, the participants. Next slide. Our programs provide actionable steps, as I mentioned before, and empower parents and students so that you're making informed decisions. We're providing knowledge for a brighter financial future via our virtual and in-person seminars, as well as providing one-on-ones and other resources via our website. Next slide. So the findings. 90% of our participants say that they're likely or highly likely to start budgeting after our classes, which we know is very important. 96% of participants found that their confidence in managing their long-term financial stability increased after our program. And 100% of our participants found that the classes were helpful in helping them understand how to manage their money. So you know that you're in the right place tonight. Next slide. And so our organization is a very small organization. We have 3 staff individuals. 2 of us are here this evening, but we are supported by a breadth of volunteer instructors that come from the finance world with years and years and years of financial expertise that provide or help enhance the content that you will be receiving tonight. And if you do have any questions or would like to partner in any way, my phone number is on the screen, and more information on how to contact us will be at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So without further ado, I will move it over to our instructors, Laura Rotter and Crystal Love. And Laura, I'll kick it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Janeda and Daphne. Looking forward to hearing any questions or comments you have as we move forward on this presentation. So next slide, please. So have to assume that the fact that you're here means that you do think financial literacy is important. My view, I work as a financial planner helping individuals understand their money and help organize it. And I find that the more you put systems in place to have clarity of, how much money you have available to spend, and savings, et cetera, it really helps reduce stress, and gives you more confidence as you make decisions in general. But, I find that when you make decisions about life, you're making decisions about money. The two are intertwined. It's hard to do one without the other. And so we at my money workshop really enjoy helping others build positive financial habits. Next slide, please. So it's hard to start a workshop today without mentioning how our lives changed over the last year and a half with COVID-19. Everyone, and it's right, it's such a strange thing that not everyone in New York or everyone in the United States, but everyone all over the globe has been affected emotionally and financially by the pandemic. And as we now hopefully begin to emerge from the pandemic, it's really important to understand where you are financially, where you are mentally, where you are physically, how this affected your life. So wanted to make sure we mentioned that. Next slide, please. So Daphne, if you're comfortable asking, how confident are you in managing your finances on a scale of 1 to 10?
I would say maybe a 7.
Wow, that's pretty good. Thank you so much for sharing.
Welcome.
Next slide, please. That happens to be, as we're saying, you were not alone, assuming that it was going to be a lower number. Of course, we can always grow from 7, but so many people, frankly, I find, don't even want to look at their money. They don't want to look at their bank statements. They don't want to look at, what's going on. They just, there's a lot of fear involved with money, and 63% of women feel that they don't earn enough to save anything. Next slide, please. But as you know, you're here. So at the very least, it shows your interest in moving up from a 7 and really having a good handle on your finances. Next slide. We love this inspirational quote: "Never forget how wildly capable you are." So today is going to be a broad overview to help you have a sense of really having a good framework to think about as you move forward in your financial life. And ideally, it come out of this workshop, if not this moment, but afterwards, when you have access to the recording and the slides, to maybe set one goal that you can move towards. Next slide, please. So there are several components to, what we refer to as a financial wellness plan. Your dreams, your goals, where you imagine you want to go in your life, and the habits you set from yourself. And the habits are going to include, how much are you saving, knowing your credit score and credit report, how you use credit cards and other forms of debt, how you invest. I mean, there's a lot of different components. Retirement plan may feel like a long time away, but how your savings towards eventually having financial freedom. And again, this is going to be an overview workshop on all of these points. And we also do workshops specifically on each of these individual points. Next slide. So having a plan, and I like to use the term, financial freedom plan rather than a budget, because budget for many people sort of sounds restrictive. But actually having a plan creates more freedom. If you understand your values and how those values inform where you want to go in the next stage of your life, rather than just closing your eyes and hoping that everything will be okay, but actually having a plan, as we said earlier, really gives you a sense of clarity and reduces stress. If you don't have a plan, on the other hand, it's an amazing number that about 70% of people who win a lottery or get a big windfall actually end up broke in a few years. I belong to an organization called the Financial Transitions Group that used to be called Sudden Money, specifically because of this. It was set up after people received a big settlement award from a medical company, and were just like giving their money away, buying cars, and was realized that really need to help people have a plan to move forward and make good financial decisions. Next slide, please.
Laura, I love that you called it a financial freedom plan. I'm gonna have to steal that one.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Daphne, what worries you most about your finances? If you're okay sharing.
It just seems like I'm having a hard time sticking with the budget.
Okay, and does that mean that you do have a budget?
I put one in place, but I don't necessarily stick with it.
Got it. Thank you so much for sharing. And yes, you are not alone. Frankly, you're ahead of the game in that you've thought about how you want to allocate your money. But yeah, many people find it hard to stick to a budget without a real motivation for why you want to stick to the budget.
Mhm.
Next slide, please. So how can you help yourself? And I'm gonna riff off of your answer again. Thank you, Daphne. Having a budget is certainly an important step. At the same time, having an understanding of why you have that budget in place. I mean, I found that working with clients, I might say, it'll really help you to save an extra certain amount each month. And maybe that works, but what really works is you've said that you want to be able to visit your family who are in California, once every couple of years. And so you need to save towards that vacation or towards that plane ticket and ability to travel. And maybe even, have a vision board that has a picture of what that goal is, to remind yourself of, why, as a bad example, but, every financial person uses it, why you're not going to go to Starbucks and buy that, that latte, because you have this goal that you're really committed to meet beyond just the numbers, because it's hard to be motivated only by numbers. Certainly empower yourself with knowledge. So, for example, as you're putting a budget together, really understanding, is this something you can stick to, or are the expenses that you're locked into right now so high that you'll just never be able to stick to it? So knowledge is certainly very important. Be positive is true in every aspect of your life, not just with your money, but certainly having a positive attitude towards your ability to accomplish what you set out to do. And as we talk about empowering yourself with knowledge, it includes knowing how much is reasonable for you to expect to save and how much you need to save towards the goals you've set. And then knowing your credit score, knowing that you're using your credit cards correctly, knowing whether you're putting good debt in place, good debt being perhaps student loan debt or a mortgage, and bad debt being credit cards that you can't repay and have large interest rates, and understanding what you owe in taxes, especially if you're not an employee. If you actually work for yourself and need to know if you need to set money aside to pay for taxes. Any questions about this before we go to the next slide?
No questions.
Thank you. Next slide, Crystal. And here's the harder part. How can families help themselves? Again, work with families where talking about money is not an easy thing. Well, there's some slides about this coming up, but we all grow up with different money stories. In my family, my husband his parents grew up in the Depression. So money is something to like rarely be spent. And my parents were a little bit younger and it was like, there'll always be money. Don't worry about it. Whether or not it was true, there wasn't a lot of fear about money. And so it's not always easy to talk about money together. I always recommend maybe if you're going to set aside time and really be aware of accepting the other person and not leading with judgment, and letting children manage their own money with encouragement from parents. Certainly depends on the age of the child, and giving the ability of younger people to make their own decisions within parameters. And I think the most important thing is just learning to talk about money together without judgment, taking a deep breath, making sure that you're setting aside a space that's not really filled with stress. Next slide, please. And so exactly, this is what I started to refer to. Why do we make the choices we make? One of the reasons I went into this field, I'm just fascinated by people's relationships with money. I've often told the story of how on the same day, when I first started my practice, I would go to people's homes and I visited a home, a beautiful, large home, floor to ceiling windows looking out at this, pool in the back. And it turned out as I spoke to them that frankly, they had very little money. They had a lot of debt on their house. I was surprised by physically how they were living relative to the income available to them. And then I visited another woman living in a small home, and she had a lot of money. So people make decisions based off of how they grew up and the messages they got from their parents. And it's not that you can change it, but just as you get more clarity about your money and how you feel about it, at least it gives you an awareness of how your relationship with money was shaped by how you grew up. And frankly, we all have these wonderful messages from our culture that, more money equals more happiness, which nothing could be further than the truth once you have your basic needs met. And so it's important to be aware of the beliefs that you bring to money. And for many of us, we may have core beliefs that, people who have money are bad people. I certainly did get that message from my parents, and it may hurt you from having financial success if somehow you feel like making good money choices and being more comfortable with money than your parents were is somehow, shaming them or otherwise negating, people that you love. So just being aware of money beliefs is so helpful. Next slide, please. So it takes work, but you can tell yourself a new story. So there is never enough money. Can certainly transition into being grateful for the money that you have, and then recognizing that choices you make can make money feel more abundant. Also, I like nice things. I always think it's important to do an exercise identifying for yourself what your top 3 to 4 values are. And maybe you like nice things, but you also like being able to spend time with family and friends. Back to the story about being able to visit family that might require a plane ride. Like, well, I, might want to buy myself new clothes, but it's more important to make sure I have the money to, spend time with people I love and value, as an example. So, so recognizing the stories you tell yourself and your limiting beliefs, and then, not that it's easy, it's not like you snap your fingers and then suddenly you move from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, but just starting to recognize the stories you tell yourself. Next slide, please. Oh, understanding your values. I have a set of values cards. I think there's like 14 of them that include things like family or work or spiritual life or learning or travel, just a list of values. And I find, when I work with people, they often want to choose all the cards. And it's like, well, no, let's try to limit it to 3 or 4. But there'll never be a direct correlation, but it's interesting to think about the values that you think help guide your decisions, and then like looking at your bank statement if you use a debit card and what the debit card is being spent on, or the credit card statement, and seeing, is there any connection between how you're spending your money and what you think is most important to you. Again, there'll never be like fixing your roof is not always going to fall under family, but really seeing if you can start to live your life according to the things that are important to you. Next slide. So Daphne, do you have a sense of what the values are that are important to you, and your vision of how you want your values to inform the next stage of your life? It's a big question to throw at you.
I do know what my values are, but to be honest, this is the first time I've ever heard anybody talk about money ever in my life, and I'm 45 years old.
Wow.
So, I'm taking all of this in like, wow, I wish I would have known this way beforehand. I have 6 children and I'm married, and one just graduated from Clemson. So I just want to make sure that my younger kids, that I'm showing them how to treat money as a woman. I have one girl, so it's, I want her to make good decisions, all of them really. And I'm about to start a new job. So really that's my main reason why taking on this class, because I've never gotten paid this much money working before. So it's like a promotion to a different company. And I just want to make sure I'm treating this money right and not, make a lot of mistakes with this going forward.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Have you spoken about money with your kids? I'm just curious.
No, I haven't. I've actually, there's another seminar for kids that I'm going to sign them up for. My 13-year-old and my 17-year-old, I'm going to sign them up for it. So like I said, this is all new to me. So I'm just loving what I'm hearing. So please continue.
Thank you. Thanks again, and congratulations on the new job, and for really taking financial literacy to heart. Next slide, Crystal. So as we've said, the choices you make today will impact your vision for years to come, and might not sound like it to you, but 45 sounds young to me. So it's a lot of time ahead of you. Next slide, please. So these statistics, always amazing to me. 41% of women have less than $500 in their checking accounts. And I know there was also a statistic a couple of years ago, right, that that if there was an emergency, it was some high percentage, Junaid.
Yeah, 40 to 44% of Americans cannot meet a $400 emergency.
Right. It's amazing. Next slide. So the first step, there are many steps, is to have a financial checklist. And these are not necessarily in order of importance. The first one And the second, I'm sorry, the second and the third, I think, track expenses and create a budget and manage it regularly. So I use a system with my clients. We have many systems. I mean, you could just really use a pad and paper and write down what you're spending money on. I have my clients figure out how much they want to spend, like first understand what bills are you paying that are not negotiable? Like, if you're paying a car lease or a car loan or rent or mortgage or utilities, things that really you cannot, that I actually would, usually what I say is if you decide to sleep all month, you're still going to pay those expenses. Like they're not going to change, and you can make a list of them. And then I say, look at what's left over after you've paid those expenses. Ideally, then you take about at least a tenth of what you're earning and maybe 20% of what you're earning and say, okay, I'm going to set this much aside in savings. And then what's left for fun? And then I say, divide that by 4 and have a separate checking account that you put that amount in. So if it's $50 a week that you could spend on, buying a sweater or going out to eat with a friend, or, I mean, I guess I'm about to say seeing a movie. I think we'll start to do that again, and have that in a separate checking account that you have that app on your phone and you can check right away how much is left of that amount that you thought you'd spend each week. But whatever system works for you, the most important thing is to just have an idea of what you want that discretionary or fun spending to be. And then the second thing is, don't beat yourself up if you spend more than it, but have a system that lets you know. Because most people have no idea if you're using a credit card and everything's all jumbled up in one account. It's always like you have to find a Sunday or a weekend to look back, and you've already made the decisions to spend it. So I think as much as possible to have sort of a real-time idea of how closely you're spending in line with your goals, not to beat yourself up, but to say, gee, I never spend just $50 a week. How can I change that? Or, gee, I never spend that much. But really having a system that, as I say, it's part of like a mindfulness training, so that if you don't have any idea, then you have no way to actually make different decisions. And that leads to being careful with credit cards and managing all debt. I do sometimes get pushback from people that like, well, but I get cash back from my credit cards or points from my credit cards. But if you know that you can't really control it and you can't have a sense of how you're spending, then I recommend, I frankly personally use a debit card. It works the same way as a credit card. I can use it wherever I go. I don't have to have cash with me all the time, but it lets me track how much I'm spending and being aware of it. And the same thing of having a bank account, and of course have a bank account, and then reviewing it regularly, because sometimes we not only get charged for things incorrectly, but sometimes put charges in place that you might look and say, why am I paying $5 a month for this? And maybe at the time you thought it would be meaningful, but now you don't use it anymore. So if you review it regularly, you don't only catch mistakes, but you see recurring charges that you don't really need anymore, and you can stop them. It's important to have, I'm sorry, somebody gonna say something? No. It's important to have an emergency fund. I think we'll talk about that quickly in another slide, but ideally having it, when you know what you spend each month, what you have to spend in each month, certainly have at least 3 months of that spending in a bank account. Just so if there is an emergency, something happens, you don't have to end up using a very expensive credit card or otherwise have to raise the funds. Have insurance, healthcare insurance, of course, and depending on if people depend on you, life insurance. I mean, there's so many things to do financially, but the most important thing as you're working to get a good system in place is to have a way that works for you to track expenses, and not to track expenses in the rear view mirror, but in real time as much as possible, so that when you set your goals, you can actually know that you're moving towards them. Any questions? Happy to answer them. Otherwise, next slide. So what is a financial goal? It's a target that's driven by how you want to save and spend your money. So your goal might be ultimately to have a down payment on a home, or to be able to have some money to, you know, help your kids when they're in college, or to pay down debt that you unfortunately accumulated. I mean, everybody has different priorities and different goals. And of course, one year your goal may be different than your goal the next year. But if you don't have a sense, right, it's like going on a road trip, but like not knowing where you want to go. I'm just going to get in the car and drive, rather than like, I want to drive to California or something. So got to start with a goal. Next slide. And we talk about SMART goals, which is know exactly what you want to accomplish. So rather than, I want to save some more money, actually know how much money you want to save, so that it's measurable. So you know when you've met your goal, or moving on a good path towards meeting your goal. Make sure your goal is not too far out of reach, but challenging enough. So again, pick a number based on what you're earning and what you're spending. So what's reasonable, for example, to save relative to that, rather than just like, you know, I don't know, I want to have $1 billion or something that you're just never going to be able to accomplish. Relevant, which I talked about at the beginning of all this. I mean, if you just pick a number just because somebody says that's how much you should save, or that's how much you should have in the bank, but it doesn't really turn you on, it doesn't really get you excited, you don't really want to get there, it's just something you think you should do, then it's going to be hard to accomplish it. And then finally, the T in SMART goals is the time frame. So and if you pick too long a time frame, it's going to be meaningless. If it's too short a time frame, you're unlikely going to be able to achieve it. Next slide, please. So here I know I want to save $1,000, so that's a specific goal. Oops, thank you. And it's relevant because you say, in case I lose my income, in the next 6 months. It's measurable. Again, it's a discrete number, like not, I just want to save some money. And in the next 6 months, so that have a time frame for achieving the goal. So just an example. Next slide, please. So Daphne, of course, I feel like I keep putting you on the spot, but you're the one person here. Do you have a sense of what kind of goal you want to work towards?
I think one of my goals is making better money choices, I guess, like with buying things, smarter decisions. And then I do have a goal of trying to save for a new home.
So a goal for a down payment on a house?
Yes.
And you have a sense of, you know, and you don't have to share that with me, but have you done research into like about how much money that would have to be?
I haven't done that part.
Right. So that would be the next step, depending on what neighborhood you want to live in. And I think just get an idea of, you know, how much, and, you know, as an aside, this is probably the craziest period of time to think about, but you can certainly start saving, because with COVID, that homes have gone up in price, but it's a great goal that can be measurable in many ways. It's easy to start to get an idea of what it would cost. And over what period of time and how much you could realistically save towards that goal. Thank you. Next slide, and I'm assuming there are worksheets. We have many worksheets. I don't know if they're specifically in this slide, or Janeda, will they have access to an actual worksheet? Or
Yes, so the worksheets are in this slide as well, the slide deck. I think right after this one.
perfect. So as you set money goals, so questions to think about, like you shared, having a down payment for a home, or even thinking about that perhaps you'd want to rent if that's more reasonable financially, but be able to afford higher rent. So first thinking about the goals, and then what might get in your way. I mean, what I've heard you share, Daphne, is just setting up a budget and then keeping to a budget, and whatever money stories or money messages you give yourself. As I shared earlier, I hate to call it a budget, because that does tend to lead to a money story of like, oh, but I'm not letting myself do things I want to do. So changing that story of like, I am doing something I want to do, I'm saving towards this goal. And identifying opportunities that are available to you. Like, well, again, thank you so much for sharing that you're going to be earning more money, and that is an opportunity to thinking about being able to actually save more towards the goal. And I love that. Difficult roads often lead to beautiful destinations. If it was easy, we wouldn't be teaching financial literacy workshops, because everybody would just be easily saving money towards what they'd like to achieve. But it's not easy to do. And another thing, I think we don't have it in a slide, but it's always nice maybe to have a friend to do it with, so you can hold each other accountable, or someone to speak to, because sometimes it's difficult to do it if you feel like you're doing it alone. Next slide, which I think, right, so a worksheet. I've been talking to a lot of people who say they journal. There's a way about when you write your goals or intentions around anything, but of course we're talking about money, around money. And again, even an accountability partner, so you can share the goals or intentions. It's one thing to say it to yourself. It's another thing to write it down. And another thing, again, to share it with someone who you trust and who you feel comfortable having this conversation with. And as we said earlier, to have an idea of when you want it to happen and how much you would need to save or think about being able to spend in order to have it happen. So this isn't a particularly complex worksheet, but making sure whether you have a journal or some other notebook where you can, start recording your expenses and your budget and your intention. Next slide. And what are your obstacles? What worries you about achieving your goals? Like, yeah, I feel like we've heard you say might be hard to actually stop spending so that able to save a bit more. But voicing and accepting, again, not so you could, be down on yourself, but just so you could hear yourself voice what might get in your way, and then potentially address it. But understanding how you're talking to yourself about money, so that you can change the conversation in your head. Next slide. And this is a corollary to what we just said. So what holds you back from achieving your goals? Specifically writing down, what are you telling yourself about what you can and can't do as you move towards the next stage of your life. And next slide. And the same question we just voiced. What are some opportunities that are available? It sounds like this is, tailor-made for you. Daphne, you have a new job, potentially a new source of income. And you've articulated what might get in your way, but then you've also articulated why this might be a time to feel like you're opening a new chapter in your life. And you're going to deal with money differently going forward. Next slide. So here's a money goals worksheet. We also have worksheets, and it sounds like you may take more workshops for budgeting. Again, it's not particularly difficult. It's, what's coming in each month. What do you have to spend each month, and what is left over, and how much out of that can you use towards saving and spending, but making sure both that your goals make sense. Common mistakes that we've talked about as we set up SMART goals is that if you set up to it's, I always find the corollary with eating and dieting. If you say, I'm going to lose 20 pounds by next month, that's like, it's not going to happen. Or I'm never going to eat a piece of cake again. Well, like, that's not going to happen. And so before you know it, you're actually eating an entire cake. It's the same thing with setting financial goals. If they're too big, I can never go out with, to a restaurant for the next year or whatever, you're just going to say, oh, forget it. I am so not doing that. And so making sure that you set goals that you can actually achieve and that you continue to remind yourself of why you're trying to achieve it. So that you're not, as I like to say, shooting all over yourself, but you're excited about achieving it and you're excited about moving towards it. So knowing how much it'll cost, and is that an achievable cost for you, and how much you need to save each month or each year to be able to achieve it in the time frame that makes sense to you. Next slide, please. Like your overall health, I mean, I did the parallel to specifically weight loss, but just in general, feeling healthy, taking care of your personal finances. It's amazing how much it informs every area of your life. And there's so much stress associated with money. I'm always impressed that if I'm in some big workshop, nothing to do with money, and they'll like ask for a show of hands. This is pre-COVID, of like what your biggest worries are. Money, if it's not the top one, it's one of the top 3 worries that people have, whether or not, no matter what size your bank account is. Everybody has worries about money, and the best way to lessen those worries is to be organized and really understanding, again, what's coming in, what's going out, what you have control over, what you don't have control over, and setting practices in place, like having an emergency fund, etc., so that when something you don't have control over inevitably happens, that you're in a position to deal with it from a place of clarity and confidence rather than from a place of disorganization and fear. And hoping that, my money workshop and this particular workshop play a small role, but some role in that. Next slide, please. Well, the takeaway we like to leave you with, Daphne, and thanks for being such a good sport of being the one live participant, is that we all have money stories and we all have anxiety about money. And the first step is to identify, that voice in your head and what it's telling you, and understand that once you identify it, you can start to reframe it and change the voice in your head. And anybody at any age can start to take charge of your finances rather than sort of your finances being in charge of you. And part of that is having a financial spending plan, a financial freedom plan, moving towards something that really speaks to you, not that somebody else told you should be a goal, but that really is a goal that turns you on enough to make the often difficult choices to start moving towards it. So as we have here, setting the goal, making a plan, reviewing that plan as much as possible. And sometimes that's hard. You don't want to look at it, but making sure you do so that you stick to it and eventually, meet the goal you're set, or maybe that goal will change. Life is a journey, and what we think we value will change over time. But we always love to see people starting to move, to starting to feel like they're in control of their money and not the other way around. Do we have another slide, or is this it? Okay. My money workshop, and you'll get this slide deck, does have so many resources, and more specific resources about credit scores and how to choose a bank, and all the little pieces that we have one slide that touched upon. This is really an overview of moving forward to be more specific. So we certainly, Daphne, invite you to check that out. We have videos, and this one, I guess, will be available as well. Anything else that I can answer for you? I know this was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot, but I appreciate the information, and I've been taking notes and taking screenshots, so I appreciate the information.
Great. And where will this recording be available, Janeda? Is this on the Kota Alliance website?
Yes, on the, well, I don't know if it'll be in a, Jenna, are you gonna feel it?
Yeah, so it's going to be on the website for sure. And also we'll send an email out to everyone, make sure that everyone has the recording as well.
Great.
Kindly also send her a copy of the presentation.
Absolutely,
Then
yeah.
She's been taking screenshots and taking notes, but she'll have everything there.
Thank
Definitely.
Thank you.
And then finally,
Sorry.
I put a link to our survey in the chat. You can complete that at your convenience. That'd be great.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank-
Daphne.
Thank
you so
you,
much.
Daphne. You're a great
Congratulations on
sport.
the new job, and with your oldest graduating. Congratulations. A lot of milestones.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I was going to say, this is an opportunity for you, Daphne, to actually take this seminar and talk with your kids about, especially them getting started now that one of them has graduated, how to get started, and you can take the knowledge that you're taking and really work helping each other as a family
Right.
to, like Laura said before, to really empower each other.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Great.
You're welcome. You all have a good night.
You too.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Daphne, for participating, and thank you, Laura, for a great presentation.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for
Nice to
having
meet you all too.
Thank you, Jana.
Take
We'll
care.
talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice
Bye.
evening. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.